Well, rest easy. My bloodline is going to survive. Those words dropped into the stark white hospital room like cold stones. The air in the room, where only the low hum of the air conditioning could be heard, completely froze. Normally, a wife would scream and cry. She would tremble with rage and furiously attack her husband. But a few minutes from now, the woman sitting on the bed would show an entirely different reaction. And this man did not yet know that this single cruel remark he just uttered would be the trigger that completely destroyed his own life. Tomorrow, I am undergoing major heart surgery. I might live. I might die. The survival rate was by no means high. When I received the explanation from the doctor, my vision went pitch black. Outside the window, the familiar Boston cityscape spread out before me. The twilight sky was gradually growing darker. The hospital room was eerily quiet. Only the ticking of the clock echoed. The sound of the IV dripping seemed to be counting down my remaining time. It would be a lie to say I had no anxiety. I wanted to keep living alongside the husband I had been married to for so long. I wanted the two of us to live quietly in our old age. Up until just a few hours ago, I genuinely believed that. Even though my own life was in danger, I was only thinking about my husband. If I died, what would happen to his meals? Would his company's management be okay? I was consumed by such worries. I heard a knock on the door. It was light, a knock lacking any hesitation. I'm coming in. It was my husband. Dressed in a high-end tailored suit, he held a small paper gift bag in his hand. The strong scent of his cologne mixed with the smell of hospital antiseptic. He was always like this. He valued his position as the CEO of a company above all else. He had to look like a successful man to everyone. That was his favorite phrase. How are you holding up? My husband stood by the bed, looking down at my face. His words sounded concerned, but there was absolutely no emotion in his eyes. He kept glancing at his expensive watch. He wanted to go home early. That was completely obvious from his attitude. I'm the first one in the morning. I'm a little scared, I said, and he let out a heavy sigh. Don't make such a gloomy face. It brings my mood down too. There were no words of encouragement. To him, even my life-threatening crisis was just a nuisance. I quietly looked down. I had supported him for 18 years. When he took over the company, and when he struggled with cash flow, I put my own life on the back burner to protect him. I poured all my savings from my days as a registered nurse into his company. He had to know that. I believed he did. However, the words that came out of his mouth far exceeded my imagination. Actually, he suddenly changed the tone of his voice. He even looked like he was smiling a little. It was an unbelievable expression for a man whose wife was facing major surgery the next day. In case the surgery fails, it would be a problem for me. There is something I need to tell you. I had no idea what he was going to say. Was it about a burial plot? Or the company? His lips moved slowly. You know your best friend, Sarah, right? The moment that name came up, my heart made a horrible sound. Sarah, my best friend since high school. She was like family to me. She was an important person I could consult about anything. I actually have a son with her. I doubted my own ears. I thought my breathing would stop. I prayed it was a joke, but his face was serious. No, he even looked slightly proud. He's almost in high school. He takes after me, a pretty smart kid. Time in the hospital room stopped. My brain refused to comprehend what I was being told. My best friend and my husband, the two of them had betrayed me. And they even had a child. If the boy was in high school, it meant this had been going on for over a decade. While I was desperately supporting him and protecting his company, they were building a family I knew nothing about behind my back. So, well, rest easy. He peered into my face. And then, he spoke the decisive words. My bloodline is going to survive. Even if you die tomorrow, my legacy lives on. The moment I heard those words, something inside me completely broke. No, I felt something freeze over completely. 18 years of marriage, 20 years of bonding with my best friend, it was all a lie. On this night, when I might die tomorrow, he was only rejoicing that his bloodline would continue. My existence as a human being meant absolutely nothing to him. What had I been desperately protecting all this time? It wasn't my husband's betrayal. It wasn't my best friend's lies. It was simply the bottomless cruelty of this man that froze my heart. Normally, this would be the time to scream and cry. I should have thrown my pillow at him and cursed him fiercely. I should have called my best friend immediately and unleashed my rage. But the reaction that came out of my mouth was entirely different. I nodded quietly. I see. That's wonderful. My voice was surprisingly calm, even to myself, and I gave a small smile. I produced a smile that looked like I was genuinely relieved from the bottom of my heart. In that instant, the smugness vanished from his face. My reaction was entirely different from what he had expected. He took a slight step back. He seemed to sense a distinct creepiness in my bizarre smile. "You're not mad?" he asked in a bewildered voice. I didn't answer anymore. I just kept looking at him quietly. There was no need to be angry. No need to be sad. He had absolutely no idea at this moment. Who was the reason he could sit in the CEO's chair? Whose credibility allowed him to live such a luxurious life? The negotiations with the bank, the cultivation of important clients. It was all built on my name and my credibility. He just had the title of CEO. He was nothing but an empty vessel. He seemed to have completely forgotten that fact. Under my blankets, I quietly solidified my resolve. Tomorrow, I will absolutely survive and return, and I will take everything back from him. I will end everything I have built for him. In the quiet hospital room, a new clock inside me began to tick. Out of the long darkness, my consciousness slowly returned. "Claire, can you hear me?" The surgery was a success. The gentle voice of a nurse echoed from far away. I slowly opened my heavy eyelids. Beyond my blurry vision, I saw a white ceiling. There was a burning pain deep in my chest. Just breathing was agonizing. But I was alive. The major heart surgery had ended successfully. When I took a deep breath, the rhythm of the heart monitor became regular. The steady beeping sound was the proof of my life. Just the fact that I was alive gave me an immense strength right now. As the anesthesia slowly wore off, the memories of yesterday vividly resurfaced. My bloodline is going to survive. The words my husband threw at me echoed over and over in my head. The face of my husband, Richard, and the face of my best friend, Sarah. The image of the two of them laughing at me clearly floated in my mind. But strangely, no tears fell. No heart-wrenching anger welled up. There was only quiet resolve. Only the next steps I needed to take were calmly being organized in my head. The day after the surgery, Richard came to my hospital room again. "Well, you look surprisingly energetic," he said with a slightly strained smile. He held a paper gift bag similar to yesterday's in his hand. He was surely a little worried about the words he had spoken the day before. He was on guard, thinking I might start crying and get angry. What he feared most was divorce. If we divorced, half his assets would be taken. His public image would be ruined. His position as a corporate CEO would be damaged. That is why he was desperately trying to read my mood. "How's your body feeling? Is there anything you want?" He suddenly used a gentle voice and approached me. I quietly looked back at him, and just like yesterday, I gave a small smile. "Thank you. I'm fine." Richard's face twitched. "Are you really fine?" "Yes, I feel relieved that you came." At my words, he was visibly confused. I wasn't angry. I wasn't crying. I didn't even utter the word divorce. Even Sarah's name didn't leave my lips. Did he think I had lost my mind? Why wasn't I angry? I could tell that a creepy doubt was slowly expanding inside him. "Right. That's good then." He showed a clearly relieved face. "I have the company to run, so I can't stay long. I'll come back." He left the hospital room as if he were running away. The eyes with which I watched his retreating back were as cold as ice. I made sure the door was completely closed. I waited for the sound of his footsteps to disappear down the hall. I slowly moved my body and picked up the smartphone next to my bed. My fingertips were still trembling a little, but there was absolutely no hesitation. I navigated the screen and called up a single contact. The registered name was Arthur Harrison. He was an acquaintance from my late father's generation. He was the head of an investment bank in Chicago, and the benefactor who had been supporting Richard's company from the shadows. I pressed the call button. After 3 rings, a quiet voice could be heard. "Claire, you made it through safe." "Mr. Harrison's voice was mixed with deep relief. "Yes. I am sorry for causing you worry," I answered in a hoarse voice. "You mustn't push yourself yet. Mr. Harrison, I have a favor to ask." He seemed to immediately sense the change in the tone of my voice. The air on the other side of the phone grew slightly tense. "What is it?" I took a deep breath and spoke quietly and clearly. "I am terminating the final line of backing." There was a short silence. Mr. Harrison didn't ask anything. He didn't ask for reasons, or the background, or about Richard. He simply answered with one heavy, quiet sentence. "Understood. I will begin the arrangements immediately." After hanging up the phone, I sank deeply into the bed. The blue sky stretched out beyond the window. "This is fine. This will set everything in motion. Why did I make the decision to abandon him the day before my surgery? It was because, when I felt my life was in danger, he treated me like an object. Richard knows nothing, Sarah knows nothing. By now, they are probably imagining their glorious future. The nuisance of a wife will soon be gone. The company is doing well, and they will never have to worry about money. He will live as a perfect family with his son. They must be having such sweet dreams. But the reality is different. Richard's medical device distribution company has been operating in the red for years. He himself completely fails to understand the true terror of that. He is just sitting in a grand CEO's chair feeling good about himself. Why hasn't the company gone bankrupt when its cash flow has exceeded its limits? Why can he keep paying his employees' salaries? He mistakenly believes it is all due to his own abilities. He fully believes that the reason the commercial bank lends him money and the investment firm continues to support him is entirely thanks to his own charm and his company's future potential. At that time, Richard was drinking coffee in his grand executive office. Hearing the news that the surgery was successful, he felt completely relieved. Tonight, he planned to meet Sarah and report this joyful news. His wife wasn't complaining. His relationship with her best friend was exposed, but it didn't turn into a messy situation. No alimony would be taken. There would be no hassle of a divorce. Life was perfect. He was smiling with satisfaction as he looked at the view outside his window. But the phone on his desk rang. It was a direct call from his corporate banker. "Richard, we need to have a little talk." It was a slightly cold voice coming from the usually amiable banker. "What is it? Did something happen suddenly?" "Actually, we've decided to hold an emergency meeting regarding your upcoming credit renewal." The smile slightly faded from Richard's face. Something was wrong, but he hadn't realized it yet. He didn't know that the single phone call I made from my hospital bed had abruptly cut the invisible strings supporting him, and that the true hell was just about to begin. An emergency meeting regarding the upcoming credit renewal? Richard scowled at the words of Mark, the bank representative. He tossed his expensive pen onto the desk. The small clatter echoed in the quiet executive office. "Mark, what is the meaning of this all of a sudden?" Richard deliberately lowered his voice. It was his usual tactic to slightly intimidate the other party. "Our company has a long history with your bank, doesn't it?" "Of course, I understand that." However, Mark on the other end of the phone was entirely unfazed. Normally, this was the kind of person who would immediately apologize, but his voice today was somehow cold and bureaucratic. "It is an instruction from headquarters. We need to reevaluate your financial situation." "Reevaluate? Are you doubting my company?" "It's not that. We simply need additional documentation." Richard let out a heavy sigh. Bankers were truly an annoying breed. The moment sales drop even slightly, they immediately make a fuss. "Fine. I'll have accounting prepare it. That should be enough." Richard unilaterally hung up the phone. A small sense of unease lingered in his chest, but he quickly brushed it off. He was a CEO, the head of a respectable company dealing in medical devices. A bank wouldn't want to let go of an outstanding executive like him. He believed that, even though, in truth, they had been bleeding money for years. That night, Richard was at a high-end steakhouse in downtown Boston. Sitting across from him was a beautifully dressed woman, his wife's best friend, Sarah. She laughed happily while swirling the wine in her glass. "She really is a good girl." "She didn't get angry at all?" "Yeah," she just nodded quietly, Richard answered proudly. "I told her, my bloodline is going to survive, so I have nothing to worry about." "That's a terrible thing to say," Sarah said, though she wasn't sympathizing in the slightest. Rather, she seemed to be pleased hearing those cruel words. But it worked out for the best, didn't it? She placed her hand over Richard's on the table. "If Claire isn't going to complain, the divorce will go smoothly." "Yeah. We might not even have to give her half the assets." "Hey, Richard, our son is going to be in high school soon." Sarah let out a sweet, coaxing voice. "He's lived his whole life pretending he doesn't have a father." "I know. We'll be an official family soon." Richard gently squeezed Sarah's hand back. "The company is doing great. I won't let you two struggle. I believe in you, Mr. CEO." The two clinked their glasses and laughed joyfully together. They did not doubt their happy future in the slightest. They had already forgotten about Claire, who was suffering alone in her hospital room. Around the same time, Claire awoke in her quiet hospital bed. The room was dark, illuminated only by the light of the street lamps outside the window. The smartphone placed by her pillow vibrated briefly. Looking at the screen, it was a message from Arthur Harrison. "I have initiated all procedures." Reading that single sentence, Claire quietly let out a breath. The commercial bank, the investment firm, the major suppliers. I have conveyed your intentions to all of them. They have already begun to move. Claire hugged the smartphone to her chest. The surgical wound on her heart ached a little, but that pain was proof she was alive. Richard understands nothing. Sarah understands nothing. Right now, the switch to the landmine beneath the feet of those two laughing fools has been pressed. The invisible fortress I spent years building up has been entirely dismantled, and Richard's company has been stripped completely bare. It is a castle of sand that will blow away in an instant if a cold wind blows. The next morning, Richard arrived at the company with his usual late executive swagger. He stepped out of his luxury car and entered the building with confident strides, just as he was about to open the door to his office. Richard, we have a huge problem. Do you have a minute? David, the CFO, came running in a panic. His face was pale, and he was clutching several sheets of paper in his hand. What is it? You're making a racket first thing in the morning. We got a call from Miller Manufacturing. Miller Manufacturing? They're our regular supplier, aren't they? Yes. The thing is, David choked on his words. They told us they are halting the delivery of parts for next month. Huh? Why? We're paying them, aren't we? They said they won't do business with us unless it's strictly cash up front from now on. Richard doubted his ears. They were a partner of over 10 years. There was a mutual trust where they always allowed deferred payments. He had never been told to suddenly pay in cash up front. Don't be ridiculous. I'll call them directly. Richard grabbed the phone on his desk with anger. He dialed the number and asked for the president of Miller Manufacturing. Hello? Mr. Miller? What is this sudden talk about cash payments? Richard? The voice of Mr. Miller on the other end was surprisingly cold. Normally, he was a man who would bow and scrape to secure their business. I apologize, but things are tight on our end too. Things are tight for everyone. Haven't we had a long relationship? It's exactly because of our long relationship that I have to say this. Miller's voice lowered slightly. Is your company actually going to be all right? Richard's heart made a sickening thud. What do you mean? Well, I've heard some strange rumors about your credit guarantee. Richard had no idea what he was talking about. Credit guarantee? Whose credit? Anyway, we require cash up front from now on. Goodbye. The phone was unilaterally hung up, leaving Richard standing there stunned. A lifeless dial tone echoed from the receiver in his hand. Richard, what happened? The CFO peered at his face with anxiety. He's telling us to pay in cash. Just pay it for now. Richard tried to act tough. But Richard, we don't have that kind of cash on hand right now. If the loan from the bank doesn't come through, we won't have enough funds for next month. Richard remembered the phone call from the bank yesterday. We need to reevaluate your financial situation. Mark's words echoed in his head over and over. A terrible premonition slowly expanded in his chest. The halt of parts delivery. The delay in the bank loan. It felt as if everything was starting to collapse all at once. Call Mark at the bank. Make them execute the loan immediately. Richard raised his voice. I am the CEO. Don't they dare look down on my company. He yelled at his CFO. But his shouting only echoed in vain against the walls of his office. He still hadn't realized it. That the ground he was standing on had already crumbled away. And exactly who it was that had launched this invisible attack. I am the CEO. Don't they dare look down on my company. Richard's roar echoed through the office. But CFO David simply shook his pale face side to side. The thing is, I've tried contacting Mark at the bank multiple times, but they keep saying he's in a meeting and won't put me through. What? Richard glared at David with an expression of disbelief. Up until yesterday, this was a man who would come running if Richard made a single phone call. It was impossible that he was screening his calls. I'll go there directly. If I speak to them directly, they'll understand. Richard roughly grabbed his suit jacket and stormed out of the company. Sparing not even the time to wait for his chauffeured car, he hailed a cab himself and headed to the bank's main branch. He was irritated. This was the medical device company he had built. He had an office in a grand building, drove a luxury car, and had a beautiful mistress. He was a chosen man, and these lowly bankers and parts suppliers were treating him with disrespect. That fact severely wounded his massive pride. When he gave his name at the bank's reception, he was shown into a meeting room. However, the person who appeared was not Mark, but an unfamiliar middle-aged man. Mr. Richard, I presume? I am Mr. Evans, the loan manager. He was a man with cold eyes. Even the gesture of handing over his business card was somewhat bureaucratic and devoid of emotion. What happened to Mark? I want to talk to him. When Richard spoke with an arrogant attitude, Evans quietly shook his head. I have taken over this account. I will be making the judgments regarding future loans. Taken over? You changed the rep for my company without permission? Yes, it is an instruction from headquarters. Evans's words were brief and to the point. So, about the upcoming credit line. When will it be executed? We have payments to make. Richard crossed his legs, speaking as if to show he had plenty of leverage. However, the words that came out of Evans's mouth completely betrayed Richard's expectations. The upcoming loan will not be executed. What? After a review, we have reached the conclusion to pass on any additional financing to your company. Richard doubted his ears. Pass on it? Are you joking? We've been doing business with your bank for years. Yes, but your company's financial situation is unfavorable. You have been operating in a de facto deficit for several years now. That is temporary. Once the sales of our new machinery get on track, we'll be in the black immediately. Richard raised his voice, but Evans remained entirely unmoved. I apologize, but our decision remains unchanged. Are you screwing with me? Are you trying to crush my company? Richard slammed his hand on the desk and stood up. Do you know who I am? I am the CEO. I'm not like you corporate drones. Evans looked up at Richard with cool eyes. I am aware that you are the CEO. However, a bank does not lend money to a title. Excuse me? Credit. Repayment capability and the certainty of management. We evaluate those factors to issue a loan. I have that credit. You've been lending to me up until now, haven't you? Evans let out a slight sigh. The reason we continued to finance you up until now was due to a different reason. However, that condition has been lost. A different reason was lost? I have no idea what you're talking about. I cannot answer any further. Regardless, the financing is stopped. We ask that you continue to make scheduled repayments on your existing debt. Saying that, Evans stood up, gave a single bow, and left the meeting room. Richard was left behind alone. In the quiet room, his mind was in chaos. Returning to the company, Richard sank deeply into the chair in his office. If the bank financing stopped, next month's funds would vanish. He wouldn't be able to pay the parts suppliers or his employees' salaries. The company would go bankrupt. That reality was thrust before his eyes for the first time. Why? Why did it suddenly come to this? Everything had been going so well up until now. Was someone trying to frame him? That night, Richard visited Sarah's luxury condo. Seeing Richard's exhausted face, Sarah was surprised. Richard, what's wrong? You look terrible. Just a little trouble at the company, Richard said, loosening his tie and collapsing onto the sofa. Trouble? Are you okay? Sarah asked anxiously. Yeah, just a little mix-up with a payment to a supplier. It'll be resolved immediately. Richard put up a front and lied. He couldn't tell his mistress that his company was about to go under. Oh, good. Sarah smiled as if relieved and sat next to Richard. Hey, Richard. Sarah's voice suddenly changed to a sweet, coaxing tone. Our son. He'll be in a private prep school soon, right? Yeah, I suppose. I really want to buy a proper house for him. Richard's heart gave a sickening jolt. What? Are you unhappy with this condo? I'm not unhappy, but he's at an age where he wants his own room. Plus, Sarah rested her head on Richard's shoulder. I thought it would be nice to have a house where the three of us could live together. Richard swallowed dryly. Buy a house? There was no way he had the money for that right now. He didn't even know what would happen to his company's cash flow. Yeah, let's hope we find a good one. Richard could only give a vague answer. I've already been collecting catalogs. How about a house in this neighborhood? The environment is great, and the school is close. Sarah happily opened a real estate magazine on the table. The photos of million-dollar homes lined up there looked to Richard like fangs, ready to tear him apart. Listen, Sarah, isn't it a bit early for this right now? When Richard squeezed out the words, the smile vanished from Sarah's face. Early? What do you mean? Well, there's the situation with Claire, and the divorce hasn't been finalized yet. Claire has nothing to do with this. She's not going to say anything, right? A hint of irritation mixed into Sarah's voice. Besides, you're a CEO. It's not like you can't afford a house or two. Those words struck Richard where it hurt the most. Yeah, of course I can buy one. I'm just saying the timing is bad right now. The timing is bad? Why? Like I said, I'm a bit busy with the company. Excuses, excuses. Sarah slammed the magazine onto the table. I've been holding back all this time, living in the shadows as your woman. Our son has had to suffer through his friends asking why he doesn't have a father. I know. You don't know anything. You only ever think about yourself. Sarah's sharp words pierced Richard's chest. She was right. He had only been thinking about himself. But what was he supposed to do? His company was on the brink of death. His mistress was begging for a house. He was trapped on all sides. Just then, Richard's smartphone rang. Looking at the screen, it was from the hospital where Claire was staying. Hello? Is this Mr. Richard? It was the panicked voice of a nurse. Yes, this is her husband. Claire's condition has taken a sudden turn for the worse. Please come to the hospital immediately. A chill ran down Richard's spine. Taken a turn for the worse. What happens if Claire dies right now? The tragic husband who lost his wife. He might be able to draw public sympathy, but what about the company's debts? Wouldn't he, as the guarantor, be left to shoulder it all? Right now, his head was filled more with his own self-preservation than his wife's life. Richard was practically running down the hospital corridor. The hard clatter of his leather shoes echoed through the quiet hospital at night. Your wife's condition has taken a sudden turn. Since receiving that call, his mind had been in a state of panic. His wife's life was in danger. Normally, one would be overwhelmed with the fear of losing a beloved family member. But what occupied his heart right now was an entirely different terror. If Claire dies right now, what happens? His company's cash flow was in the worst possible state. The bank had coldly refused additional loans. The parts supplier he had a long history with was demanding cash up front. At this rate, he absolutely would not be able to make next month's payments. But Richard had one last lifeline, Claire's personal accounts. That was where she kept the money she had desperately saved from her days as a nurse. Furthermore, the inheritance from her father, who passed away a few years ago, should still be sitting there untouched. The amount was not small. It was more than enough to save his company from its crisis. However, if she were to die tonight, those accounts would be immediately frozen. The inheritance proceedings could take months. That wouldn't be in time for the company's payments. The company would inevitably go bankrupt. If you're going to die, at least let me use the money first. Richard genuinely wished for such a horrifying thing in his heart. Arriving at the waiting room outside the ICU, the attending physician stood there with a grim face. Richard, your wife is currently in an extremely critical state. At the doctor's heavy words, Richard grimaced. Critical? Didn't the heart surgery succeed? Post-operative complications. Her blood pressure has dropped rapidly, and her consciousness is fading. The doctor looked straight into Richard's face. She is somewhat stabilized right now, but tonight might be the turning point. Tonight might be the turning point. Hearing those words, a cold sweat slid down Richard's back. He had absolutely no time. Doctor, can I see my wife's face for just a moment? Richard pleaded with a desperate expression. There is something very important I absolutely must tell her right now. The doctor hesitated slightly, but quietly nodded. Understood. But please, keep it extremely brief. You must not tire her out under any circumstances. With permission granted, Richard immediately opened the door to the hospital room. Inside the dimly lit room, only the rhythmic sound of machines echoed eerily. Claire lay on the bed, connected to countless tubes. Her face was as white as paper. Her breathing was shallow. She looked to be in immense pain. Behind her oxygen mask, her lips were trembling faintly. Anyone could see her flame of life was flickering out. It was the tragic state of the wife who had dedicated 18 years of her life to him, yet no emotion welled up in Richard's chest. He didn't feel sorry for her, nor did he wish for her to live. He approached the bed and whispered coldly into Claire's ear. Hey, Claire, can you hear my voice? Claire's heavy eyelids slowly fluttered. Her unfocused eyes vaguely captured Richard. Richard. A hoarse voice leaked through the oxygen mask. Good. She's conscious. Listen closely. There's no time. Richard checked to make sure no one was around. Then, he pulled out several folded sheets of paper from his inner pocket. It was a new set of guarantor documents to borrow money from the bank, and a power of attorney form that would allow him free access to Claire's personal assets as operating capital for the company. The company is in a bit of danger right now. The bank suddenly flipped on me. To his dying wife, Richard began to speak only of his own self-preservation. If this keeps up, my company will go under. So, I need you to temporarily lend the company your inheritance from your father. Claire just stared silently at Richard's face. Sign these documents right now. Richard shoved the papers in front of Claire's eyes. Deep inside her chest, a burning pain flared. Amidst her labored breathing, her husband's words clearly reached Claire's ears. I heard tonight might be your turning point. Richard's words were far too cruel. If something happens to you, your accounts will be frozen. If that happens, my life is over. Richard roughly pulled back Claire's blanket. He forcibly grabbed her right hand, the one pierced by an IV needle. He tried to force the pen he brought into her slender fingers. I took care of you for 18 years. You can at least do this for me at the very end. Took care of you. For me at the very end. A cold wind raged in the depths of Claire's heart. This man genuinely believed that he had provided for me and made me happy. How much of my own dreams I had given up to work behind the scenes for his company. How many times I bowed my head to earn credit from the banks for him. He had completely forgotten all of it. No, he never saw me as a human being from the start. In the moment his wife was dying, the only thing he was worried about was his own money. He had a mistress named Sarah and a secret child. To protect his life with that woman, he was trying to steal the assets of his dying wife. Claire tasted a deep despair and pain like never before. Her body was truly at its limit. Her consciousness felt as if it could be sucked into pitch-black darkness at any second. There was absolutely no strength left in her hand. She was truly cornered at the precipice of life and death, but the quiet flame in her heart never extinguished. Richard forcefully tried to make her grip the pen. Claire mustered the last ounce of strength she had left. Just before the tip of the pen touched the paper, she violently swatted his hand away. Clatter. The pen fell to the floor, making a cold sound. Richard looked at Claire with a face of disbelief. Hey, what are you doing? I told you we don't have time. A clear color of rage surfaced on Richard's face. Stop acting selfish. You are my wife. You just do what I tell you. He tried to pick up the pen again and yell at her. That was the moment. Beep! The heart monitor suddenly began to blare, a frantic warning alarm. The stress from Richard's forceful actions and horrific words had placed a burden on Claire's weakened heart that exceeded its limits. Hey, what's wrong? Hey, Claire! Richard yelled in a panic, but Claire kept her eyes closed and stopped moving completely. Along with the blaring alarm, the door to the hospital room burst open. The doctor and several nurses rushed in, their complexions pale. What are you doing? Step away immediately. No, I was just trying to get a signature. Get out of the room right now. You are interfering with the treatment. At the doctor's forceful words, Richard was physically pushed out of the hospital room. Before his eyes, the heavy door clicked shut. Beyond it, tense voices and the sounds of machinery flew back and forth. Richard stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the documents clutched in his hand. He didn't get the signature. Damn it. What a useless woman. Dragging me down right until the very end. He clicked his tongue loudly and shoved the documents roughly into his pocket. Even as his wife might be dying, the only thing in his chest was the irritation of not getting his hands on the money. But Richard had no way of knowing. Those power of attorney and guarantor documents, even if Claire had signed them, were already completely worthless. The day after her surgery, through Arthur Harrison, Claire had cut off all backing. The bank and the investment firm had confirmed Claire's strong intent and abandoned Richard. Richard still believed he held power as a CEO. But in reality, he held absolutely nothing anymore. The only thing cornering Claire was her physical condition. The invisible trap she had set was already tightening deeply around the neck of his company. Richard began to pace the hospital corridor in frustration. If it comes to this, I'll just have to raise the money another way. He took out his smartphone and started making calls. Without realizing that he was slowly falling to the bottom of a pitch-black pit, the cold night wind blew into the hospital entrance. Richard was walking toward the taxi stand, unable to hide his frustration. Truly a useless woman until the very end. He clicked his tongue while roughly shoving his phone into his pocket. His wife was hovering between life and death in the ICU, yet there was absolutely no worry for her in his mind. All he had was, how am I going to get the money for tomorrow's payments? That was it. The commercial bank had completely rejected his request for additional funds. His reliance on his wife's inheritance was shattered because he couldn't get her signature. At this rate, the company was truly in danger. He glared at the neon lights of the city flowing past the taxi window. If it comes to this, I have no choice but to go there. The face of a certain person floated in Richard's mind. Arthur Harrison, the head of an investment firm and a powerful backer since the days of his late father. Surely, he would do something about it. He was an old acquaintance of his father, a benefactor who had always watched over him. The next morning, Richard was the first to visit Harrison's investment firm in Boston's financial district. In a high-end meeting room in a skyscraper, Richard sank deeply into a plush sofa and crossed his legs. Inwardly, he was extremely panicked, but he never let it show on his face. "Well, Richard, what brings you here so early?" Along with quiet footsteps, Mr. Harrison entered the room. He was a composed man with streaks of gray hair. Normally, he would greet him with a gentle smile, but today, Mr. Harrison carried a somewhat cold aura. "Mr. Harrison, actually, I have a bit of a consultation." Richard leaned forward and lowered his voice. "The folks at the bank suddenly flipped on me." "Oh, so, I would like you to expand my investment line for emergency operating funds." Richard made the demand as if it were his natural right. Because up until now, whenever he was in trouble, Mr. Dodd Office of Harrison had always helped him. However, Mr. Harrison shook his head. "I cannot do that." It was a quiet but definitive rejection. Richard lost his words for a moment. "Cannot? Why? We are a company with great future potential." As Richard raised his voice, Mr. Harrison let out a small sigh. "It seems you still don't know the truth about anything, Richard." "The truth?" Mr. Harrison stood up and brought over a thick black file from his desk. He slammed it down on the table right in front of Richard. "This is the secret I have been keeping since your father passed away." Richard stared at the file with a puzzled look. "A secret? What is it?" "These are your company's true financial records." When Mr. Harrison opened the file, dozens of pages of tax returns and balance sheets were sandwiched inside. Richard looked at them and scoffed. "What? If it's financial statements? My accounting department sends them up every month." Mid-sentence, Richard's eyes widened. The numbers written there were entirely different from what he knew. Revenues were dropping year after year. Worse yet, the expenses and the amount of debt were bloated to an abnormal degree. In the bottom profit column, an unbelievable negative figure was recorded. What is this? This must be some kind of mistake." Richard's voice trembled. "It is no mistake. These are the authentic documents submitted to the IRS, Mr. Harrison stated coldly. "Your company has been bleeding money in the red for almost 6 years now." "That's a lie. That's impossible." Richard grabbed the file with both hands and flipped through the pages rapidly. But no matter where he looked, there were only seas of red numbers. "I've cultivated new clients. Our sales should be going up. It's because you are squandering money far beyond your sales. Your executive compensation, the lease for your luxury cars, and, Mr. Harrison looked straight into Richard's eyes. "The personal entertainment expenses you've been writing off on the company dime." Richard caught his breath. The money he spent taking his adult mistress Sarah to dinners, the gifts he bought her, he had been writing them all off as corporate expenses. That was all clearly recorded in these documents. With it being in such a terrible state, why hasn't the company gone bankrupt? Mr. Harrison asked quietly. Richard turned pale and shook his head side to side. I don't know. Weren't you the one helping us, Mr. Harrison? It wasn't me. And it wasn't the bank. Mr. Harrison pulled out an old, single sheet of paper from the very back of the file. The reason your company managed to survive is because there was one special backer. A backer? Yes. That person pledged their own personal assets as collateral and promised to shoulder all the responsibility. Richard looked at Mr. Harrison with a face of disbelief. Who is it? An acquaintance of my father's? Some CEO? Inside his mind, there was still the sweet thought that because he was a chosen man, some great person had decided to save him. I cannot say their name. However, that backer contacted me yesterday. Mr. Harrison's eyes glinted cold as ice. To inform me they are terminating their final line of backing. Richard sprang up from the sofa. Are you kidding me? If they do that, the company is completely finished. Exactly. That is why the bank stopped your loan. And I will not put out another cent either. Mr. Harrison snapped the file shut. Your company is done for. Richard clutched his head and slumped down on the spot. He couldn't believe it. Up until yesterday, he thought everything was perfect, but an unseen hand had completely swept the ground out from under him. Please, Mr. Harrison, introduce me to this backer. Richard bowed his head desperately. I'll speak to them directly. I'll get on my knees. I'll do whatever it takes. I will absolutely convince them. Mr. Harrison quietly shook his head. Impossible. That person is currently in no condition to speak to anyone. Why not? You, of all people, should know that best. Richard completely failed to understand the meaning behind Mr. Harrison's words. A person who hasn't been in a condition to speak to anyone since yesterday? Is there someone like that near me? For a brief moment, the image of Claire losing consciousness in the hospital room flashed through his mind, but he quickly dismissed the thought. There's no way that woman has that kind of power, he cursed inwardly. She's just a former nurse. She doesn't know the first thing about business. She's a boring wife. There's no way a woman like that could support a company sitting on millions in debt. Richard stumbled out of the investment firm with unsteady steps. The sunlight outside felt overly blinding. It's not over yet. I am a CEO. I refuse to let it end here. I will find that invisible backer and force them to give me money no matter what. I'll tell whatever lie I need to. He took out his smartphone and called Sarah. Hello? Sarah? About the house. Could you wait just a little bit? In contrast to Richard's panicked voice, the voice on the other end was icy. Wait? What do you mean by that? We need the tuition for our son's private school by next month. I know. But there's a little issue at the company. Are you telling me you don't have the money? Sarah's voice was clearly irritated. No. I can get it right away. It's just that the paperwork is taking a little time. Richard put up a front and lied again. Fine, if you say so. But if you break your promise, I'm taking our son and going straight to your office. She unilaterally hung up, leaving Richard standing there stunned. His company was on the verge of bankruptcy. His mistress was demanding money and threatening him. He was finally beginning to understand just a little bit of what a terrifying situation he was in, but he still didn't realize it. The most terrifying truth was still hidden in deep darkness. Richard, what does this mean? It's not just Miller Manufacturing. Demands for payment are flooding in from all our other suppliers at once. CFO David let out a sound akin to a scream. The phones in Richard's executive office had been ringing non-stop since morning. Calm down. It's just a misunderstanding. Richard desperately tried to act cool, but cold sweat was running down his back. Since yesterday, the atmosphere in the company was clearly abnormal. The bank loan halted, major suppliers demanding cash up front. And this morning, the worst-case scenario had become clear. They couldn't even prepare the employees' payroll for next week. Richard, at this rate, the company will, I said, I'll handle it. Richard slammed his desk hard. David flinched, his shoulders trembling, and fell silent. Richard could only maintain his composure by raising his voice. The truth was, he didn't have a single solution. The blood-red tax returns Mr. Harrison had shown him. If that was the reality, the company was dead. But he still refused to believe it. I am the CEO. I am an outstanding executive. It has to be some sort of mistake. He kept telling himself that. Just then, Richard's smartphone rang. Sarah's name was displayed on the screen. Richard clicked his tongue and moved to the corner of the room. He answered the phone in a hushed voice. What is it? I'm busy right now. Richard. I'm standing downstairs in the lobby of your building. What? All the blood instantly drained from Richard's face. The tuition for our son's high school. You promised to wire it today. Sarah's voice was as cold as ice. You won't answer your phone, so don't try to brush me off. If you can't pay, I'm coming up there right now. Wait, don't. Richard frantically hushed his voice. The employees were looking at him with suspicious faces. If his mistress stormed in during this carnage, it would be completely over. His dignity as CEO, his credibility, it would all be blown away. Understood. I will absolutely get it together today. So whatever you do, do not come upstairs. I can trust you, right? Our son's future depends on this. If you lie to me, I'm going to see Claire. Who do you think I am? I will pay. Hanging up the phone, Richard pressed his head against the wall. Money. There's no money anywhere. The bank and the investment firm abandoned him. No one is going to help him. What should I do? Claire's face floated into Richard's mind again. The image of his wife lying unconscious on the bed with an oxygen mask. That's it. Her accounts. She might not have regained consciousness yet. Or perhaps she did, but desperate times call for desperate measures. If he didn't get the money today, Sarah would storm the company. The company and his family would both collapse entirely. I'll just forge the power of attorney. Richard's eyes were completely bloodshot. His wife's social security card, banking information, and checkbook were in the drawer at home. He could fake a signature later. Using his position as her husband, he should be able to fool the bank tellers and withdraw the cash. The fact that it was a crime didn't matter to him now. Saving himself, that was the only thing on his mind. He roughly threw open the door to his office. Richard, where are you going? Ignoring David's persistent voice, Richard jumped onto the elevator. He rushed out to catch a taxi to return home. Claire's assets belong to me. I took care of her for 18 years. It's my natural right to take this much. He would use that woman's money to rebuild the company and start a new life with Sarah and his son. He firmly believed that. However, he didn't know that in the mailbox of his empty home, a single envelope had arrived. The sender was a law firm, and around that time, on the hospital bed, Claire was quietly waking up. There was no longer any hesitation on her pale face. The preparations for her counterattack were entirely complete. The more desperately Richard struggled, the deeper he would fall into the trap she had set. Stepping out of the taxi, Richard violently opened the front door of his home. It was a sprawling colonial house in an upscale suburb outside Boston. It was a home he had forced himself to build a few years ago just to show off as a CEO. He threw his shoes off, walked across the expensive marble floors in his dress socks, and headed for the master bedroom. His eyes were completely bloodshot. He roughly yanked out the drawers of Claire's vanity one after another. Her undergarments and clothes scattered across the cold floor. Where is it? Where did she hide it? He treated his wife's precious belongings like garbage. His head was filled only with saving his company. In the back of the bottom drawer, under some handkerchiefs, a small wooden box was hidden. Richard pried it open with brute force. Found it. Inside were Claire's checkbooks, trust documents, and social security card. A vulgar smile surfaced on Richard's face. He opened the bank statement. A massive balance of hundreds of thousands of dollars was printed there. The inheritance her father left behind, and the money she had desperately saved from her days as a nurse. With this much, he could cover next month's payments. He could also pay the tuition for Sarah's child. He shoved the checkbook and documents into his pocket. He didn't feel the slightest bit of pity for his wife who was dying in her hospital room. I gave her the title of a CEO's wife for 18 years. It's her absolute duty to spend her money for my sake. He truly believed that. Just as Richard was about to leave the house, he noticed an unfamiliar, thick envelope in the mailbox. The sender was a major law firm in downtown Boston. What's this? Some annoying solicitation? Richard had no time to read such things now. He tossed the envelope onto the hallway floor and jumped back into the waiting taxi. His destination was the branch of the bank where Claire's accounts were held. It wasn't the main commercial bank for his company. It was a different bank further away. At the teller window, Richard put on a dignified attitude. I'd like to withdraw cash from my wife's account. He slid over a withdrawal slip he had filled out in advance. The amount was $500,000. My wife is currently hospitalized with a major illness. We need it for future medical expenses and living costs. He deliberately put on a sad face to draw sympathy. Playing the good husband was a simple task for him. Inwardly, he was smiling, convinced of his victory. This will save the company. Sarah's mood will improve too. I truly am a lucky man, born under a special star. He didn't doubt it for a second. The female teller took the slip and the checkbook, looking slightly troubled. Please wait a moment. She went to the back desks and started speaking in a low voice with a man who appeared to be a manager. Richard crossed his arms and waited, irritated. A few minutes later, the person who emerged from the back was an older man wearing a name tag that read branch manager. His face was surprisingly cold. Mr. Richard, I apologize, but we cannot process this withdrawal. Richard doubted his ears. Huh? Why not? I have the checkbook and the documents right here. I'm her husband. Yes. However, this account has already been frozen. Frozen? Why? My wife isn't dead. She's still alive. Richard raised his voice loudly. His roar echoed through the quiet bank. Surprised customers looked their way, but the branch manager's expression didn't change at all. It is not because she passed away. It is due to legal proceedings. The manager placed a copy of a document in front of Richard's eyes. First thing yesterday morning, we received a formal notice from an attorney representing your wife. An attorney? The image of the envelope he had thrown onto his hallway floor flashed in Richard's mind. Yes, all of Claire's assets have been transferred to a separate, secure, irrevocable trust. The current balance of this account is $0. Richard's heart made a sickening thud. Don't spout nonsense. When I looked at the statement earlier, there was $500,000 in there. That is an old record. The most recent record is here. The manager turned his computer monitor toward Richard. There, it clearly displayed. Balance, $0. Richard lost his words. His mind went entirely blank. First thing yesterday morning. In other words, just hours after he was in the hospital room laughing, my bloodline is going to survive, so I have nothing to worry about. Before she even went into the operating room, Claire had already put her lawyer in motion. The moment he betrayed her in that hospital room, She had quietly and surely pulled the trigger on her counterattack. Are you screwing with me? I'm her husband. Half of our marital assets belong to me. Richard slammed the counter and yelled. That woman took the money without asking. That's a crime. Call the police. Looking down with cold eyes at Richard as he screamed disgracefully, the branch manager spoke. Sir, please keep your voice down. This is a bank. There was a clear hue of contempt mixed in his voice. These assets are funds your wife possessed prior to your marriage, along with inheritance from her father. As her husband, you do not have a single cent of claim over them. What did you say? If you continue to cause a disturbance, we will call the police ourselves for trespassing and harassment. Please leave. Completely rejected. Richard snatched back the checkbook and documents as if stealing them and fled the bank. The sun outside beat down mercilessly on him. His legs were shaking violently. He couldn't breathe properly. No money. There is no money anywhere. The final pile of cash he thought he could steal from Claire had already been perfectly protected by her own hands. That quiet smile. Her face, neither angry nor crying, just nodding quietly. That wasn't because she forgave him. It was because only she knew that the noose was already around his neck. He was the one who was incompetent. Just then, Richard's smartphone began to vibrate violently. Looking at the screen, it was from his CFO. David, what is it? Richard, where are you? We have a massive problem, David screamed in a tearful voice on the other end of the line. A woman named Sarah stormed into the company. Richard's heart nearly stopped. She's screaming at the top of her lungs in the lobby, demanding you show yourself and pay her money right now. We have bankers and clients here. Richard sank to the ground right where he stood, still holding the phone. It's all over. The status he desperately protected as CEO, his pride as a prominent man. It was all about to be completely destroyed in front of his employees and clients by the hands of his own mistress. Wait, I'll be right there, Richard said in a hoarse voice. But he no longer had the strength to support the heavy steps needed to head back to the company. Up until now, he thought he controlled everything. His wife, his company, his mistress. But the reality was different. He was just a hollow puppet. The moment the invisible shield named Claire vanished, it was his destiny to be crushed under the weight of his own lies and betrayal. Dozens of consecutive text messages from Sarah arrived on his smartphone screen. Liar, are you running away? I will absolutely never forgive you. That string of text dragged Richard down into a bottomless dark abyss. Liar, give me the money right now. Sarah's screams echoed through the company lobby. When Richard rushed to the office, it was hell. The beautiful vase at the reception desk had been knocked to the floor and shattered. Dozens of employees watched anxiously from a distance. The clients who had come for meetings stood there with appalled faces. Sarah, stop. What are you doing here? Richard rushed over in a panic and grabbed Sarah's arm, but she violently shook his hand off. Don't touch me, you liar. Sarah's face was horribly distorted with rage. The sweet, coaxing face she always showed him was nowhere to be found. You said you'd pay our son's tuition today. Don't yell in a place like this. I'll explain later. Explain when? You've been stringing me along this whole time. Everyone in the lobby was listening to their conversation. The CEO has a secret teenage son, and he's fighting because he can't even pay for him. The image Richard had desperately protected was crumbling with a loud crash. Please, just keep it down. The company is in a bit of a tight spot right now. Richard pleaded in a small voice, mindful of the stares around him. Huh? A tight spot? You're a CEO, aren't you? The bank stopped our funding. I really have no money. The moment Richard spoke that truth, Sarah's movement stopped completely. No money? Yeah. Claire's accounts are frozen too. I can't touch them. Sarah looked Richard up and down with a face of utter disbelief. He was wearing an expensive suit, but inside, he was completely empty. She thought she was going to become a CEO's wife. She believed she was going to be the wife of a wealthy man. She realized it was all a lie. So you're just a broke loser? The words that came out of Sarah's mouth were as cold as ice. Then you're worthless to me. Sarah, wait. I'll definitely figure something out. Don't joke with me. Give me back the time my son and I wasted on you. Sarah glared at Richard with eyes looking at garbage. I'm done. I'm hiring a lawyer and coming after you for every cent of child support and damages. Wait. Don't go. Ignoring Richard's desperate cries, she stormed out of the lobby. The sound of her high heels echoed coldly. Richard was left standing alone in front of the shattered vase. The gazes of the employees pierced him. Contempt. Disgust. And anger. Even CFO David wouldn't meet his eyes. His dignity as CEO was completely gone. He had no company money. His mistress had left him. The charm he believed he had was nothing but a facade for his wallet. All that was left were seas of red debt he could never repay. Having lost everything, Richard covered his face with trembling hands. It was hard to breathe. What should I do? Who will help me? At that moment, one face floated into his mind. Claire. I have to apologize to Claire. He was still thinking only in terms of his own convenience. If I get on my knees in her hospital room, she'll surely forgive me. Just like the old days, she'll step in and help me again. Convinced of this, he broke into a run, heading for the hospital once more. He still hadn't realized just how much of a fool he truly was. The automatic doors of the hospital slowly slid open. Richard, out of breath, rushed into the spacious lobby. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his tie was wildly crooked. He looked just as pathetic as he did moments ago when he was being violently cursed out by his mistress in the company lobby. He had no room left to care about the cold stares of the people around him, but his mind was still full of self-serving excuses. Claire will absolutely forgive me. That woman can't live without me. She's just a plain, boring woman. If I cry a little and apologize, she'll shell out the money for me again. He kept telling himself that in his heart, as he frantically mashed the elevator button. His wife had survived heart surgery and was hovering on the edge of life and death. Yet all he thought about was his company's payments and how to protect his own lifestyle. Arriving at the ICU floor, he ran toward the nurse's station. "Where is my wife, Claire?" when Richard asked in a loud voice. A veteran nurse looked at him with cold eyes. "If you're looking for Claire, she was moved to a VIP suite in the general ward last night." A VIP suite? Why would she be in such an expensive room? It was at the patient's own request. "You can visit when she is feeling well, but please keep it quiet." Richard tilted his head. Claire, who was frugal and always saving money, checking into the most expensive VIP suite. But quickly, a vulgar smile surfaced on his face. "I see. That woman really did have a secret stash of money I didn't know about. If I can use that money, I can pay the parts suppliers. I might be able to rebuild the company." With a lighter step, he headed toward the VIP suite at the far end of the hall. He had no idea what depths of despair he was about to be pushed into. Standing in front of the hospital room door was a familiar man in a suit. It was Arthur Harrison, the head of the investment firm. "Mr. Harrison, why are you here?" Richard rushed over in a panic, but Mr. Harrison stared back at him quietly. His eyes weren't the gentle ones of the benefactor he always showed. They were completely the eyes of a stranger. "I'm here to visit Claire, and I knew you would come running here. Perfect timing. Mr. Harrison, please help me convince Claire." Richard grabbed Mr. Harrison's arm, pleading desperately. "I was wrong. I just had a little affair and skimmed a little company money. I'll apologize. I'll get on my knees, whatever it takes. So please, tell her to lend money to the company again." Mr. Harrison quietly, but forcefully, shook off Richard's hand. "You really don't understand anything, do you, Mr. Harrison's voice was as cold as ice, echoing in the quiet hospital corridor. "A little affair. Skimmed a little money." Mr. Harrison let out a deep sigh of utter disgust. "What you have done cannot be brushed off with such light words. You completely destroyed the life of a human being who dedicated everything to you for 18 years. Richard pouted in dissatisfaction. "Please don't interfere in a marital quarrel. I am a CEO, you know." "A CEO?" Mr. Harrison looked at Richard with eyes full of profound sadness and contempt. "You seem to believe you are an outstanding executive, but I told you this morning, didn't I? There is a special backer who supported your company from the shadows." Richard gasped. "Right. Please introduce me to that person. I'll beg them directly. I promise I'll turn over a new leaf and work hard. You've already met them, Mr. Harrison quietly pointed to the hospital room door behind him. "Huh?" Richard let out a dumbfounded sound. "What are you talking about?" "It's just my wife in there." "Exactly. Your wife is the special backer who kept your company alive all these years." Richard's time stopped. His mind went blank, and he couldn't immediately process Mr. Harrison's words. "Claire is the backer? Don't be ridiculous." Richard involuntarily raised his voice. "That woman is just a former nurse. She doesn't know the first thing about business. She's just a woman who stays home quietly and cooks dinner. You really have never looked at your company's numbers, have you?" Mr. Harrison pulled an old copy of a document from his inner jacket pocket. It was a copy of the vital loan agreement signed with the bank years ago. When your father passed away and you became CEO, The company was already sitting on massive debt. The bank judged that they absolutely could not lend money to you, someone with no management experience. Bankruptcy was certain. Richard caught his breath. He had never heard that story once. He thought that the moment he sat in the CEO's chair, the performance went up, and the bank came bowing to him. But the company didn't fold. Do you know why? Mr. Harrison stared straight into Richard's eyes. Because Claire came to my office and the bank's loan office. Over and over and over again. Over and over? Yes. She took her entire inheritance from her father, and every cent she worked her fingers to the bone to save as a nurse, deposited it all in the bank, and made a promise. If the company goes bankrupt, I will shoulder all the debt. So, please, save my husband's company. Richard lost his words. His mouth hung half open, and his breathing grew shallow. She came bowing her head to me through rain and wind. You must keep it a secret from my husband. He has a lot of pride, and if he knows he's being rescued, he will be deeply hurt. Please stay quiet so he can feel like he succeeded as a CEO on his own merits. Mr. Harrison's voice contained a quiet, yet raw anger. What the bank trusted was not your fake title of CEO. They kept lending money based on Claire's deep love, resolve, and solid credibility. The strength left Richard's legs. Leaning his back against the wall, he slid down and crumpled to the floor. The CEO's chair he had sat so arrogantly in, the luxury car he drove while looking down on others, the lavish meals he enjoyed with his mistress. Every single bit of it was built by his wife, shaving away her own life behind the scenes. He was nothing but a clown dancing arrogantly on a safe stage his wife had prepared for him. That's a lie. It's a lie. Richard clutched his head with both hands, shaking it violently. I worked late every night. I drank with clients and won contracts. And all those clients fled in unison today, didn't they? Mr. Harrison's cruel sentence pierced deep into Richard's chest. They knew, too, that the true head of this company was not Richard. The moment they realized Claire had withdrawn her support, your company became worthless garbage to them. Richard covered his face with both hands. His hands were shaking uncontrollably, his teeth chattering. The perfect world he believed in was crashing down around him. I am the best. I am the greatest. My wife is a pathetic woman who can't live without me. That's what he thought, looking down on her all this time. But the reality was the exact opposite. He was the pathetic man who couldn't stand on his own 2 feet for a single second without his wife. Mr. Harrison, Richard said hoarsely in a trembling voice. What should I do? Mr. Harrison looked down quietly at Richard and delivered a cold parting blow. I hear that boy who calls you his father is about to enter high school. Richard flinched, his shoulders jerking. How did Mr. Harrison know about that? You see, Claire, right up until the day before her surgery, she was consulting with me out of concern for that boy's future tuition. What? Even if it was a child her husband made through betrayal, the child himself is innocent. It would be a pity if the boy couldn't go to high school, so she asked if there was any way to set up a trust for him. A wordless scream welled up from the depths of Richard's chest. When he was laughing in the hospital room saying, "My bloodline is going to survive, so I have nothing to worry about," his wife was trying to protect the future of the very child of the woman he betrayed her with. Just how cruel and how foolish had he been? The sheer weight of that truth finally broke Richard completely. He pressed his face against the cold hospital floor and broke down, sobbing aloud. But what had been lost would never, ever return. On the cold hospital floor, Richard wept loudly. But then, a single dark thought floated into his mind. Wait a minute. Claire was worried about Sarah's son's tuition. He raised his head and roughly wiped away his tears. That's right. She's a kind woman. She's just a little angry right now. A twisted hope was born in Richard's heart. If I apologize properly, she'll surely forgive me again. If I say it's for the kid, she'll absolutely put up the money. He stood up and brushed the dust off his suit. Then, deliberately contorting his face to look sorrowful, he opened the door to the hospital room. Inside the spacious VIP suite, Claire was sitting quietly on the bed. She was just staring out the window at the blue sky. Her complexion was still pale, but there was a strange strength in her profile. Claire, Richard's voice trembled as he dropped to his knees beside the bed. I was wrong. I was such an idiot. Forgive me. He placed both hands on the floor and bowed his head deeply. I heard from Mr. Harrison. You were the one holding the company up. Claire didn't answer. Richard pressed on. You were worried about Sarah's kid, right? So, I'm begging you, with that kind heart of yours, save the company just one more time. You can abandon me, but please, protect the future of an innocent child. He used the child as a shield. To save his own company, he used the life of his mistress's child as a bargaining chip. Inwardly, he was laughing. This is it. With this, I can control this woman again. There was a long silence. Claire slowly looked toward Richard. Her eyes were colder than if she were looking at trash. She pulled a brown envelope from her bedside. Wordlessly, she dropped it right in front of Richard. What is this? New loan documents? Richard's chest swelled with expectation as he hurriedly opened the envelope. But what was inside was a set of legal papers. Divorce papers. Richard's voice cracked. Claire's name was already signed and notarized. In the witness section was Arthur Harrison's signature. Why? Aren't you going to forgive me? With trembling hands, Richard pulled out the other document. It was a certified letter sent by a law firm, a lawsuit demanding massive damages for infidelity and emotional distress against both Richard and Sarah. The amount was so astronomical a normal salaryman could work their whole life and never pay it off. Claire, this isn't what we talked about. Richard stood up and yelled. You said you were worried about the kid's future, Claire answered quietly. Yes, I was very worried. Then why are you doing this? Because you don't love that child. Richard lost his words. Yesterday, when I was dying, the only thing you worried about was the company's money. Claire's voice echoed heavily in the quiet room. The only person you love is yourself. You view that child as nothing more than a tool to extract money. Richard had been hit dead center. His face turned bright red and he stumbled backward. Besides, Claire gave a small smile. Sarah should have received the exact same documents by now. At that same moment, in a condo in downtown Boston, Sarah was screaming. In her hand was the exact same document Richard held. No way. There's no way I can pay this kind of money. She was shrieking alone in her room. Her dream of becoming a CEO's wife had vanished. Richard was penniless and drowning in debt. On top of that, a massive lawsuit awaited her. It's all Richard's fault. He's the one to blame. Sarah grabbed her smartphone and began calling Richard like a madwoman. In Richard's pocket, the phone began to ring violently. In the cold air of the hospital room, Richard just stood there, frozen. There was no path to victory left for him anywhere. Inside his pocket, the smartphone kept ringing crazily. The screen displayed Sarah's name. Richard clicked his tongue and forcefully powered it off. Screw this. I'm not paying any lawsuit. He stormed out of the hospital room and ran down the corridor. In his hand, he gripped the divorce papers Claire had thrust at him. His face was twisted red with frustration. Fine, I'll give you a divorce, Richard screamed in his heart. If that woman cut off her backing, I'll just rebuild the company with my own power. He still hadn't grasped reality at all. If the banks are out, I'll just borrow from acquaintances. I have plenty of CEO buddies I drink with downtown. I have an elite network. If I ask them, I should be able to gather $500,000 instantly. He firmly believed that, without a doubt. Richard jumped into a taxi and headed to his company. Arriving at the building, he took the elevator up to the executive floor. However, the atmosphere on the floor was clearly wrong. Normally, phones would be ringing and employees would be bustling about. But right now, it was eerily dead silent. Hey, what are you all doing? Stepping into the office, Richard lost his words. The employees were cleaning out their desks. They were packing their personal belongings into cardboard boxes. What are you doing? Get back to work, Richard yelled at the top of his lungs. CFO David walked over quietly. Richard, there is no more work. David's eyes were completely dead. What do you mean? The bank contacted us earlier. The corporate accounts have been entirely frozen. Richard's heart made a sickening thud. All remaining cash in the company was seized to offset the debt. We can't move a single cent. Ridiculous. They can't just do whatever they want. It's not whatever they want. It's exactly according to the contract. The moment Claire's guarantee was removed, it was decided this would happen. David placed a stack of resignation letters from every single employee on the desk. Nobody is staying at a company that can't even pay payroll. Thank you for everything. The employees stood up wordlessly and walked out of the office, one after another. Wait, are you abandoning me? At Richard's scream, not a single person looked back. In the vast, empty office, Richard was left entirely alone. Damn it. I'm the CEO. I won't let it end in a place like this. With trembling hands, Richard booted up his smartphone. He called the CEO of a construction company he frequently golfed with. Hello, John? Actually, I have a bit of a cash flow issue. Ah, Richard. Sorry, I'm heading into a meeting. Click. The phone was unilaterally hung up. Next. Mr. Miller. Richard frantically called another fellow executive. Mr. Miller, please. Lend me just a little money. On the other end of the phone, Miller scoffed coldly. Richard, do you really not know what everyone thought of you? We only did business with your company because of your wife's credibility. Everyone knew she was the one bowing her head behind the scenes. Richard's mind went blank. You were just playing the CEO on your wife's dime. Nobody trusts times you times personally at all. Don't ever call me again. The call ended, and the mechanical dial tone echoed in the quiet office. Richard's smartphone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor. This was the ultimate truth. It wasn't just the banks or the investment firm. His suppliers, his drinking buddies downtown, everyone in his professional circle knew the truth. That the man named Richard was an empty vessel. Because the invisible shield named Claire was there, everyone humored him. He was the only one who misunderstood, thinking, I am a special man, dancing around like the emperor with no clothes. That truth utterly snapped Richard's spirit in half. No one had ever been looking at him, no one respected him. Richard collapsed to his knees, planting his hands on the cold floor. In the sprawling office, only his pathetic sobs echoed in vain. Kicked out of his own company, Richard wandered the streets aimlessly. He had nowhere to go. There was only a few dollars left in his wallet. His bank cards were all frozen. Before he realized it, he was standing in front of the hospital again. He had no choice but to cling to Claire. He had to get on his knees, lick her shoes, and beg for forgiveness. Just as he entered the hospital lobby with those wretched thoughts, Richard, a low, hoarse voice called out. Turning around, Sarah was standing there. Her hair was a mess, her eyes red and swollen. The beautiful mistress was nowhere to be seen. Standing next to her was a tall boy in a high school uniform. It was Richard's son. In Sarah's hand was the lawsuit demanding damages. She must have come to complain directly to Claire. But she had been stopped by lawyers before reaching the room and turned away. Why? Why did it have to end up like this? The moment Sarah saw Richard's face, she broke down crying on the spot, utterly devoid of energy. Richard couldn't even help her up. He just stared intently at the son standing next to her. Richard had always dreamed of the day he could announce himself as the boy's true father. He was supposed to be the proud, wealthy CEO father his son could look up to. But the Richard right now was just a debt-ridden man in a wrinkled suit. His son looked down at Richard with cold eyes. He already knew everything. That his mother had been having an affair all these years. That the man in front of him had betrayed his sick wife to father a secret child. And that the moment his money ran out, he tried to abandon them instantly. Richard reached out a trembling hand. He tried to touch his son's shoulder. Tears spilled in heavy drops. It's your dad, Richard said through his tears. I always wanted to see you. I wanted us to live together. But his son quietly swatted Richard's hand away. No. It was a cold, quiet voice. A heavy silence settled over the lobby. His son looked straight into Richard's eyes and answered, A man who made my mom cry. I'll never call you my father. Richard was struck speechless. His breathing stopped completely. A pain like a sharp knife gouging deep into his chest ripped through him. His son didn't look at Richard again. He pulled up Sarah by her arm as she cried on the floor, turned his back, and started walking away. Without looking back even once, they disappeared beyond the automatic doors of the hospital. Richard was left alone in the lobby. He lost his company. He lost his money. He lost his grand title and his public credibility. But the true collapse happened right now. The future with his son he had always dreamed of. The only family that shared his blood. He was completely rejected as a human being by that very son. A despair far deeper and darker than when he lost his CEO chair enveloped Richard. Richard dropped to all fours right there and wailed aloud like a child. What he truly lost wasn't his company or his money. It was family. When he realized that obvious fact, he was already completely and utterly alone. Rejected by his son in the lobby, Richard no longer even had the energy to stand up. For a while, he remained slumped on the cold floor, unable to move. His mind was blank, and he couldn't hear the sounds around him. Only his son's cold voice, "I'll never call you my father," echoed endlessly in his brain. How much time passed? By the time he came to his senses, Richard had unconsciously stood up and started walking with heavy steps. His destination was Claire's hospital room once again. He got in the elevator and looked at his reflection in the mirror. The shadow of the man brimming with confidence, wearing custom suits worth thousands of dollars, was completely gone. His suit was stained and wrinkled, his tie hung loosely, his hair was a mess, his eyes sunken, he looked like a corpse. Just a few days ago, he thought he was a perfect man who had everything. He believed he could control his wife, keep a mistress, and act superior as a corporate boss. But how about now? Trusted by no one, loved by no one, needed by no one. He was entirely cut off as a human being by his own flesh and blood. That fact smashed the very last shred of pride remaining in Richard's heart into a million pieces. He walked down the hall with heavy steps, that confident stride he had when he came to visit his wife before her heart surgery was gone. Back then, he had looked down at his wife's face and laughed. My bloodline is going to survive, so I have nothing to worry about. Just how cruel and foolish were the words he had spoken. Now, the true terror of those words became sharp fangs tearing his own chest to shreds. He stood before the door of the VIP suite. He didn't even have the strength to knock. Clinging to the doorknob, Richard slowly pushed the door open. The late afternoon sun was shining quietly into the room. Claire was sitting on the bed, reading a book. Noticing the sound of the door opening, she quietly raised her head. There was no more anger or sadness in her expression. It was just a very quiet, serene gaze, like looking at a distant landscape. Richard took one step into the room, and like a puppet whose strings had been cut, he collapsed right there. The sound of his knees hitting the cold floor echoed in the quiet room. He covered his face with both hands and began to cry, pressing his forehead against the floor. Ah, ah. A beast-like wail leaked from the back of his throat. It was no longer fake crying to beg for forgiveness. It was a cry of hopeless sorrow, realizing that his life was completely over. For a while, only Richard's wretched sobbing echoed through the hospital room. Claire said nothing. She just stared at the man breaking down on the floor like a cold breeze. Why? Richard squeezed out a hoarse voice, his face a mess of tears and snot. Why didn't you tell me? It was a self-serving resentment. If he had known the true red ink reality of his company, if he had realized Claire was supporting everything behind the scenes, he wouldn't have done something so foolish. He wouldn't have had an affair with Sarah, and he would have cherished his wife more. Richard was still trying to blame his environment and lack of information for the sins he committed. Claire slowly closed her book and answered quietly, yet clearly. You never asked. That single, short sentence weighed heavily on Richard's chest. What? Richard raised his head and looked at Claire. A long silence passed. Claire's eyes seemed to see through the entirety of their 18-year marriage. You never, not once, asked me. Claire's voice lacked any wave of emotion. It was incredibly still. About my thoughts, my pain, my very existence. Richard lost his words. Claire was right. Every day, he only talked about his company, boasting about himself. How outstanding he was, how much his subordinates adored him. He only talked about that, and never once lent an ear to Claire. How she was managing the living expenses every day. What she felt when she went bowing her head to Mr. Harrison and the banks. Even when she went to the hospital alone, fighting the anxiety of her heart disease, he told her not to bring annoying talk into the house and completely ignored her pain. He had forgotten that the human being known as his wife even existed there with a heart of her own. I waited the whole time. Claire shifted her gaze out the window. For the day you would finally see the real me, even just once. For the day you would value me as a human being, not for the company or the money. But you never noticed. Right until the very end. Tears overflowed endlessly from Richard's eyes again. Regret buried his heart like pitch-black mud. Then, Claire brought her gaze back to Richard. There was a long, long silence. Only the ticking of the clock in the room echoed. Tick, tick. Even regarding the future of your son. The moment he heard those words, Richard froze as if struck by lightning. His son's future? What does that mean? Mr. Harrison's words resurrected in his mind. Claire, right up until the day before her surgery, she was consulting with me out of concern for that boy's future tuition. Claire quietly began to speak the truth. I knew for years that you were having an affair with Sarah. I knew there was a child, too. Richard caught his breath. Knowing all of that, she had continued to support the company without saying a word. Normally, one would divorce immediately, but I couldn't do it. Because your company had many employees, and because Sarah's child committed no sin. For the first time, a hint of emotion mixed into Claire's voice. I could feel my body deteriorating. If I died, Your company would go bankrupt immediately. If that happened, Sarah and that child would surely be lost on the streets. Richard looked at Claire with eyes as if looking at something unbelievable. What is this person saying? The husband who betrayed her and his mistress's child. Normally, they would be the targets of utmost hatred. And yet, she genuinely worried about that child's future? That's why I consulted Mr. Harrison. I asked if there was a way to set up a system to support just his tuition from my personal assets, so that even after I died, that child could go to high school and college. Richard's throat made a wheezing sound. His chest heaved violently, as if he had forgotten how to breathe. The day before the surgery, I was planning to tell you all about it. I was going to tell you to rest easy, because even if I died, I would protect the boy. I was planning to say that, forgive you, and quietly head into the operating room. Claire cast her eyes down sadly. But you came to my room and told me, didn't you? My bloodline is going to survive, so I have nothing to worry about. Those words had completely destroyed Richard's own life. That cruel remark he tossed out just to satisfy his own petty pride. It had forever shredded his wife's final act of kindness. In that moment, I understood for the first time. The thing you value wasn't me. It wasn't Sarah. And it wasn't that child either. It was simply your own empty pride. That's why I decided to end all of my support. Richard couldn't say anything anymore. Just how shallow, how foolish had he been. His wife had tried to embrace everything with a love as deep as the ocean. Not just him, but the lives of his mistress and her child too. Without realizing that unconditional love, he had trampled on her and laughed. The memory of being rejected by his son in the lobby today overlapped. When he tried to play the father, his son despised him. But in places he couldn't see, his wife had been genuinely trying to protect that son's future. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Richard rubbed his forehead against the floor, continuing to apologize like a broken machine. But he understood better than anyone that his apologies would never reach her again. What he lost wasn't the company. What he lost wasn't the money. It was the true kindness and love of the one human being who thought of him until the end, who even tried to shoulder his sins. Richard lay face down on the floor, wailing aloud. A deep sorrow and pain that the word regret could not begin to describe tore through his entire body. In the hospital room, the tragic sobs of a man who lost everything echoed endlessly. Claire just looked down at him quietly. In her eyes, Richard's figure was no longer even reflected. Months passed. The seasons had completely changed, and warm, soft sunlight poured over the town. However, only inside Richard's heart did a cold, unending winter remain. Richard's medical supply company quietly and completely went bankrupt. The more he struggled to do something about it, the worse the situation became. Not a single person reached out a helping hand to him. The grand title of CEO, the luxury car he drove just to show off, the massive house he forced himself to build in an upscale suburb, all of it was seized to repay his massive debts. The moment the people around Richard knew he lost his company, they scattered like spiders and fled. Sarah, of course, left him too. She could not escape the massive lawsuit for damages filed by Claire. At first, she fiercely confronted Richard, trying to make him pay it. But the moment she realized he didn't have a single cent to his name, she flipped and screamed at him. Tracked down rigorously by lawyers, her lifestyle was completely shattered. The dream of becoming a CEO's wife vanished, and rumors reached Richard's ears that she had fallen into a life of working day and night just to pay off the settlement. Richard's son never appeared before him again. To his son, Richard was nothing more than the worst kind of adult who made his mother suffer and abandoned them. The future where he could puff out his chest as a proud father disappeared entirely before it was ever in his grasp. Now, Richard lives alone in a small, old apartment on the outskirts of town. The walls are thin, so he can hear every sound from his neighbors. A dim, cramped room where the heater is broken. From early morning to late at night, he works standing on his feet as a security guard at a construction site. Rain or shine, he has to keep standing on the cold pavement. He returns home with an exhausted body and eats a cold, microwavable dinner with a discount sticker from the supermarket by himself. It has no taste. It's just a meal to fill his stomach. Nobody calls him CEO. Nobody flatters him, and nobody listens to his stories with interest. At night, when he closes his eyes under his thin blanket, the scene from that hospital room always floats into his mind. My bloodline is going to survive. That phrase he proudly tossed out is now tightly choking his own neck. Just because you share blood doesn't mean you become family. What he truly should have cherished was not a bloodline, but the presence of the wife who continued to support him for 18 years without a single complaint. Only after losing it did he realize her unconditional kindness. But no matter how many tears he sheds, no matter how much he wishes to return to the past, that warmth will never return to Richard again. He has no choice but to live the rest of his life carrying that regret in the dark sea of isolation. Meanwhile, Claire was safely discharged and had begun walking an entirely new path in life. The surgical scar on her chest still aches a little sometimes, but that small pain was definite proof that she was living in the present. She had moved far away from the noisy city to a small coastal town in Maine. She had started working at a small flower shop, a dream she'd had for a long time. Every day she worked surrounded by brightly colored flowers, enveloped in the scent of the earth. She wasn't doing it to pay off someone's debt, nor was she doing it to uphold someone else's vanity. She stood on her own 2 feet to live her own peaceful time. On a weekend afternoon, Claire was taking a slow walk along the coastal road, a piercingly blue sky, and the gentle sound of the waves. White seagulls flew comfortably through the air. The heavy despair and suffocating agony she felt in that cold hospital room were nowhere to be found anymore. Neighbors passing by greeted her with warm smiles. "Hello, Claire. Beautiful weather today, isn't it?" "Yes, it truly is perfect for a walk. The flowers in my yard bloomed so beautifully. I'm glad. You picked out some wonderful seedlings after all." Claire returned a genuine smile from the bottom of her heart. She no longer needed to force a fake smile to appease a husband. She no longer needed to hide her true heart and endure in silence. Every day was so calm and so free. She recalled the phone call she got from Mr. Harrison a little while ago. "Are you really okay with this? I can help you as much as you need with your life from here on out," Mr. Harrison had asked with a slightly worried tone, as her longtime benefactor. Claire had answered without hesitation in a bright voice. "Yes, I appreciate the sentiment, but this is exactly how it should be. He has his life, and I have mine. From now on, I am going to walk on my own 2 feet." In that hospital room on that day, in that moment she felt her life was in danger. When she heard Richard's cruel words, something inside her completely ended. But that was never a misfortune. It was the moment the invisible heavy chains that had bound her for years were finally severed. It looked as though she lost everything, but she had regained the most important thing in life, her own true heart. Claire faced the ocean and took a deep breath. The scent of the salt spread gently deep into her chest. Her new heart was beating powerfully and steadily. It was no longer a heart forcing itself to beat for someone else's sake. It was the sound of hope, beating to let her own life shine. "I am alive. I am truly living my own life now." She looked up at the blue sky and quietly closed her eyes. The warm sunlight gently illuminated her face. For the rest of her life, she would walk on her own 2 feet without anyone getting in her way. That certain premonition and a sense of happiness warmly filled her chest. What you lose through betrayal is not just trust. What you truly lose is the presence of the person you took for granted. And the most agonizing regret is realizing the kindness of the one person who cared for you until the very end, only after they are gone.